Hello.
Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I'm a big animated fan.
Okay,
I
good.
grew up watching that movie, so this is like a big moment for me meeting you.
Good.
I want to ask you first about your filmography.
Yep.
Before talking about I Swear.
Yep.
Looking back at your filmography, we see how much you enjoy making comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see yourself directing another genre, like a full drama or like an action movie in the future? Do you enjoy comedy and you kind of like to see that?
Yeah, I'm drawn to comedy, but I find myself drawn to like a natural humor rather than like a big kind of obvious comedy. I like kind of natural humor that we all see during our normal lives and things. And one of the things that interested me in I Swear and in Tourette's was that there was a theme of humor that seemed to run through John's story and John's life. And when I first met him, I said, if I told you that I was interested in the humor, would that upset you or annoy you or irritate you? And he said, no, he said, my life has been the most hysterical, but also the most tragic story that you could imagine. And he said, even on a daily basis, that there's been a real mix. So I think that's something which is common in most of my films, whether I even realize it or not. Even if you look at a film like What to Expect When You're Expecting, mm-hmm. It's about pregnancy and about having babies and having children. And I have 3 boys, and I know that pregnancy is like, it can be upsetting and tragic, but it all can also be hilarious and exciting and and then you go back to Waking Ned or Nanny McPhee. With the family, there's a lot of humor there, but there's also a lot of sadness and there's a lot of emotion. And I think if you were looking for a theme, I think you're right. I think it's that kind of humor and emotion, but kind of brought together. And a lot of people, I think, make films which are very dramatic and tragic and emotional, or they make films which are funny and comedic. But I think because each of our lives is sometimes funny and then sometimes pretty tragic and upsetting. And I think I like to see stories that reflect our own experience of life.
And show all the emotions.
Yeah, because that's kind of what it is. The difficult part is trying to balance them all in a film and not have the humor feel too cheesy or like it's kind of stuck on to the film, and not have the drama so dark and tragic that you then can't imagine laughing 2 minutes later. So, but as we know, with real life as well, sometimes something tragic happens, but from that, people find something which is humorous just to survive it, I think. And I talked to John about humor, and he said that if it wasn't for the humor, he would struggle to get through each day, because Tourette's could be really, quite nasty and quite a dark condition.
Yeah. Talking about John Davidson,
mm-hmm.
How was the process like writing this movie? Like you met him first,
mm-hmm.
and then you wrote the movie, you worked together, he was involved in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'd remembered the documentaries. There were 3 documentaries. The first was in 1989, and I looked on Facebook. I decided that I was very interested in this project, but it was too early to say whether I was going to commit until I'd met John. And I didn't even know if John wanted a film to be made of his life. So I found him on Facebook, and which is very useful about the modern world. You can find anyone, anywhere. I found him on Facebook, and we had a Zoom call. And it was lovely to see him, because I'd really only seen him when he was younger. And he seemed good, and he was working and still had his job in the community centre. And I said, look, maybe I should come in and see you. Is that okay? He said, yeah, okay. So I went to Scotland, and I remember I knocked on his door, and he answered the door, and I said, hi, John. He said, hi, Kirk, come on in. And I said, shall I take my shoes off? And he said, let's have sex. And I tried to make a joke of it. I said, shall I take my shoes off first? And he said, no. He said, I didn't mean that. I said, no, I know. I understand you didn't mean it. But we sat down and we had a coffee, and we started to talk. And the first thing that he explained to me was that over the years, the Tourette's community has felt like it's not been taken seriously by a lot of media outlets, whether it's TV or radio or journalists. And that often people just want a cheap joke, so they might get John on a radio station, and what they really want is for him to say something outrageous, and then it becomes a news event and things. So there was a little bit of mistrust of me as a director coming forward. So the first thing I did was I made him an executive producer on the film. And I said, what that means is that you have a voice and your opinion will be listened to. And he said, okay. And that's what I did. So I listened to his story. I asked him questions. I recorded, very much like a journalist. I just recorded everything. Then I went away. Then I wrote a script. And I was determined to write everything that he told me in the script. I knew it would be way too long, but I just did it. It was 195 pages. And then I thought, okay, well, that's not very interesting. That's not very interesting. That's repetitive. And I just started to bring it down and down. But that was the start of the process for me, and it was a really important one, but really unusual, because normally I've worked on works of fiction. So I invent the story, I invent the world, I invent the characters. But I really enjoyed having a bit of help. It was nice to talk to a real person and say, this is what happened to me, this is how I felt. So I put it all into the script. And then, of course, the next process really was once I'd cast Robert Aramayo. And Rob then did like 3 months solid work on the project. He lived in Shields, where John lives, and he also spoke to people who had Tourette's in the evening as well on video calls. And then Rob would start feeding things back to me, and there were things that John had missed and he'd forgotten to tell me. So we were just about to film, and Rob called me one evening and said, did you know that John has to kiss a lamppost if it's not straight, or if it's not the right colour, or if it's a different design? I said, I never knew that. I never knew. You never told me that. I said, that's really, that I could use that. He said, well, he's just told me that today. So I would take that bit of information and then I put it into the script. So towards the end, Rob was helping me. John had helped me. I'd put it all together. And so that was kind of the process of, before shooting. But then when we started shooting, Rob said to me, do you expect me to say exactly what you've written in exactly the same place every take? And I thought that's a really smart question, because Tourette's just comes out and it's like lightning. You can't script it and you don't know where it's coming and what happens. So we would often start with the scripted version, and then we might do a version with no tics in it at all. And then I'd say to Rob, you just have this take now, just do what you want. And Rob would come up with tics and words that he'd often heard other people use. So we had a variety of material when I went into the cutting room, and that helped me set the tone of the whole film.
Other than Robert's performance,
yeah,
it's amazing.
And the direction.
And the direction, of course. Is the educational purpose behind the whole movie? For example, for me, it made me realize how little I knew about this syndrome.
Yeah.
Did it happen the same to you? Like, how much did you know about Tourette syndrome before?
I knew very little about Tourette's when we started, and I think it's fair to say that anything I knew had come from the documentaries that I'd seen about John over the years. So I learned as soon as I knocked on John's door and he opened it. It's like I just said, the first thing he said is, one of the first things he said was, ignore the tics, but don't ignore the person. And that was a really key thing to start with. And then I asked him what now looked like really obvious questions. I basically said, is Tourette's like, I have a room in my head, and if someone walks down the street with big ears, okay, I'm not going to say anything that's rude and upsetting to people. But in that room in my head, which has a locked door, that thought stays there. I don't say it. I said, is it as if someone with Tourette's has the same thought, but their door is open and they just say it? And he said, no. He said he can be triggered by things, definitely. But most of the time, he doesn't know what's coming out of his mouth until it leaves his lips. And it is usually the opposite of what he believes himself. And that's where people get very confused, because the language is homophobic, sexist, racist, upsetting. It makes people want to attack him, and it has done over the years. But he describes Tourette's almost as more like a separate voice. And it's very spiteful, it's very nasty. It goes into a room and it will work out the very worst thing it can say to cause upset and to cause anger. So John said it's not what he's thinking said out loud. It's like another voice that just makes him say it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And talking about that, when you went to the BAFTA, and like people start talking about how John was like saying words, and did that situation make you upset? Did that situation make you understand how important your movie is nowadays?
I think on the night, and you have to remember that it was in a theatre where most people had already seen the film, because most people were BAFTA voters, and they had to see the film in order to vote. So I felt like the people who had seen the film understood exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
There were another group of people, which is normal, who had not seen the film, and they were understandably upset, angered, confused. Mm-hmm. And I just wish everyone could have seen the film. What did happen on the night, there was a lot of thought went into it. And before the cameras started recording, someone welcomed everyone, and they talked about not using your phones and not going to the bathroom, during the recording. And then they said, for those of you who have seen I Swear, John Davidson is here with us, and we want to welcome him. But as you know, with Tourette's, anything could happen. He could say anything could happen. Mm. And the reaction from everyone applauded, everyone cheered and whistled. John stood and he just kind of said thank you to everyone. And I thought, this is almost better than winning an award. This is John Davidson being totally accepted within a community where he would normally feel alienated. And then what happened was Tourette's. That's what Tourette's is. And I felt I was upset for John because he was made promises that night that there was a 2-hour delay. Anything that was said could be edited out. And somehow it wasn't. So it was a very difficult night. And John was very upset by the hurt that had been caused to other people. And it spoilt it. In many ways, that night was like Tourette's. And I said to John a few days after, I said, are you okay? And he said, that's what my life is like. That's what every day is like for me, just on a smaller scale. And I thought, wow, that for me was a really upsetting night. And yet for you, that's every day. You go to the shops to buy some milk, you say something, and someone threatens to punch you in the face. And then you say, I'm sorry, I've got Tourette's. And then they say, I don't care. You must be able to control yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's complicated. I think we're okay now. And I've seen a lot of messages. There were some really horrible things online, but I've now started seeing people who had very negative opinions say, I've now seen the film and I understand, and I think I was wrong to judge so quickly. So I hope that the whole situation will eventually turn and people will be educated. Yeah.
How does that make you feel as the director of the movie, like feeling that you are actually like educating people and making people aware of this?
if I'm honest, it isn't the reason why I made the film. I didn't sit down and think, I'm going to make a film that will educate people. I wanted to make a film about John's life because I thought it was fascinating, and I thought it was a really human story that I wanted to tell. But I did very early on think, if we make this film, I'm sure it will help people understand what Tourette's is. What I didn't realize, but I'm starting to realize, there's a much wider group of people who are saying thank you for making this film. And, Tourette's is a neurological condition. But I'm getting letters from people who have autism, people who have OCD, people who have ADHD, people who have very high anxiety, of which there are a lot of young people now, and saying thank you for making a film about a neurological condition which is often invisible. It's inside of people's heads. If you have OCD, you have to touch, but you can't really see it very well. Or if you have high anxiety and you're terrified of going outside, you can't see it. So I'm really excited to have initiated a film and a project that is being so well received. I've had notes from people who work in prisons who, as they say, it's helped them identify people in their prison system who have Tourette's. I've had letters from parents saying that their children used to be frightened about going to school, but now they know that some people in school have seen I Swear, and they say they're starting to understand. So it's nice, I don't think it'll change the world forever, but it might help a little bit.
Well, you helped me.
Oh, that's good.
And I'm recommending the movie to everyone.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Last question.
Yeah.
I always like to finish my interviews asking if you want to recommend a movie that you have watched recently and you want to share with the world a new discovery, or I don't know.
Wow, that's always difficult when someone says that. Obviously I watched a lot of films for BAFTA, but I think those films... There was a film that wasn't talked about too much, which was called Steve. Mm-hmm. And it was, in many ways, it was a similar genre to I Swear, in that it talked about teachers and the importance of teachers and how difficult it is for them, especially when they're dealing with kids who are considered to be very difficult behaviorally. And I really thought that was a special film and deserved to be seen by people, and maybe, the educational system can be improved with a film like that.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. That was lovely. Thank you.